Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Team 21, and today we're here to talk about change. My name's Sarah Atkinson. I head up programs and practices at Atlassian, and I'm really excited today to be joined by two of our fantastic customers to have a conversation about what change means in the context of their world. Now, there's an amazing saying, which is quite regularly used, which is change is the only constant, and never before has that been more relevant than in the year of 2020. So I'm really excited to hear today what that means for our customers, what we've been seeing and how we've been tackling change, whether it's in the last year or just the transformation that our various companies are making at the moment. So a little bit about me and the role that I play at Atlassian. So as I said, I head up programs and practices. At Atlassian, we have around 4,000 people building great products and services. And my team is 100 people, and we're essentially change agents disguised as program managers and coaches. So we work with our people building great products and services, and we look at what do we need to do, what do we need to change, how do we continue to evolve as an organization? And that could be ways of working, it could be the practices and how we go about our days. It's also about the behaviors and our leadership skills, for example. So it's an amazing challenge that we have in Atlassian on how do we continue to evolve as we continue to scale. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel, our customers, and get a little bit of insight as to who they are and what change means in their context. So first off, handing over to Heather. Welcome, Heather. Love to hear a little bit about who you are, the role that you play, the company you work for, and what does change mean in your context? What was the catalyst for change?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So about my role, I'm Managing Director of Discoverability at VML Y&R, a global marketing agency that specializes in the complete end-to-end customer experience. And so I oversee three teams, the organic search, paid search, and performance content teams, which is about 40 experts across North America and London. And I've been with the agency since 2014. So for us, the stimulus for change, I guess it would actually be a shorter answer if the question was, what hasn't changed? Just since I've been with this company for the last 7 years, we've been through multiple mergers with partner companies in our WPP network over the last several years, which requires an incredible amount of change management, as you can imagine. But also my team has grown from one person in one discipline in 2014 to 40 people across 3 disciplines as of 2021. So major organic growth that requires an entirely new way of working and collaborating. And just like everyone else, obviously COVID's changed almost everything about our ways of working and how we collaborate with one another. So while we were always a globally dispersed organization, it was a mix of online and in-office interactions. And now 100% of us are interacting in video chats all day long. And actually, what I'm noticing as I'm saying this out loud is that the biggest change is always people figuring out how to come together in new ways. And you're totally right. We're in a constant state of change, whether it's shifting client relationships or solving entirely new client problems we've never seen before, evolving our ways of working. Nothing stays the same for very long.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. We'll get into a bit more detail in a minute, but welcome to the panel. And passing over to Jessica, welcome. Tell us a little about yourself and your context.
Sure thing. Hi, my name's Jessica Sapsis. I'm a director of product at Toast. We are a cloud-based POS system serving exclusively the restaurant industry. So our day in, day out is serving the, very dynamic changing needs of the restaurant industry, which obviously, the last year has just been an acceleration of a number of trends that already existed in the market, but certainly, 2020 was a unique experience. So that's what change has sort of meant for us broadly. Personally, I've had a lot of change in my life as well. So it's always an evolution.
Excellent. Interesting. So you talk about yourself and also just, I think when we think about change, there's obviously a huge impact on humans, us as people, the people that we work with, all the way from our leaders through to the people doing the great work. Jessica, I'm curious, what has that meant? How have you influenced or engaged people to embrace change as opposed to see it as a threat, for example? What tactics have you applied?
I think there's always keeping the user front of mind. So I think that's one of the tactics that, on the product team, you're always trying to think of, what are the things that customers and users are really trying to accomplish day in and day out, and really setting that context for how the team's operations and the things that the team is working on can really enable those workflows, enable those jobs to be done, and how we can help our customers be successful. That's Toast mission. You know, our broad mission is to help restaurants succeed and thrive. And particularly in 2020, that had to be our overriding dominant theme. You know, that's the thing that we kept at the forefront of everything that we tried to do. And so really embracing that change, you know, it was never more mission critical than it was in 2020. We had to change the way that we operated, the way that we engaged with our customers, and help them change the way that they engaged with their guests. So sort of that next step to help everyone sort of navigate all the differences in the way restaurants operated in 2020 versus any other time.
Yes, that's interesting. Love to hear your perspective of this, or maybe we jump to Heather on, you know, I mean, the change or the experience of 2020 obviously wasn't ideal as far as the conditions around it. But do you see it? There's a positive here that it's not forced, but it's encouraged us as humans to embrace the need for change and to have that more of that growth mindset. What's your thoughts on that, Heather?
Yeah, I actually completely agree. It's not all bad. Like I said, we were split across offices and digital interaction, and now everybody's forced to interact with each other online, which has actually become kind of a more inclusive experience of our colleagues around the world, because we're all in the same situation. We're all face to face on the call instead of a handful of people in a conference room and then some poor soul around the world in a different time zone by themselves, right? So we've learned a lot about how to collaborate in new ways with each other to navigate this change together that we might not have been forced to do without the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. So obviously being a global company and being based here in Sydney, it's very easy to optimize for the crew that I have in my immediate reach or the people you bump into queuing for the canteen each day. It's really interesting to see sort of the stronger relationships I've personally built with my non-Australian teammates, for example, because we're essentially all working at the lowest denominator, aren't we, on sort of how we interact and having to sort of optimize for that. So, and now is interesting here in Australia, as we start gradually going back to the office, it's actually quite jarring. It's very interesting, this hybrid model where everything we've learned through necessity over the last year, we're now having to sort of slip back into more of a hybrid model. And yeah, it's very interesting to see how we've been conditioned and how we approach the sort of the gradual transition globally as we sort of, I think everything will return to normal as we know, but yeah, it's sort of that we now move into a hybrid distributed world, which is quite interesting. One thing I'm curious about is, we touched on a little bit, but you know, change is personal. It starts with the people in my mind. What have each of you had to do personally? What have you changed in yourselves in order to embrace sort of and take your teams on this journey? I'll start with you, Jessica, if you don't mind. What's that look like for you personally?
I think for me personally, you know, there was, you know, I had a very, I think, unique kind of COVID experience, just taking it back to the COVID journey. Because that journey was also, you know, for me personally, the journey of me becoming a parent and being out on leave and sort of as a very career-minded woman, having this experience of, you know, taking extended leave and sort of shifting my priorities around. So I knew there was change coming for me personally, you know, no matter what in 2020, it was going to be a different ball game. But I think, you know, with the added dynamic of COVID and the way that, you know, Toast organizationally had to respond to the pressures that were on the restaurant industry at that time. When I came back from leave, I came back to a very different organization in terms of the way we were planning, the way we were executing. Stakeholder management was different. So there was a lot of differences in just sort of the day-to-day ins and outs of how the teams were working together. And then also, you know, the priorities of the organization had certainly, you know, been very responsive to the needs of restaurants. That's the thing we care about the most. So personally, I had to let go of a lot of things and really understand that the change was for the good. There was a lot of benefits that came out of a faster, more collaborative working style that sort of formed out of this new paradigm. And I had to sort of reevaluate, you know, how are we thinking about priorities? And so for me, that was an adjustment. but I think it was a good one. And I think it was an exercise in sort of flexibility that I enjoyed going through.
Excellent. Do you mind if we just dig a bit deeper? You mentioned planning and priorities there. It'd be interesting just to unpack that a little and just give our listeners something that maybe resonates with them, or how you went about that. Can you just, what does that look like what did the old world of planning look like, and now what did it look like in 2020? And for what reason? Like, how did you, what did that ritual look like, if you like?
Yeah, definitely. So, in terms of the restaurant industry, there's certain areas where we had at Toast sort of identified some common themes. We used a quarterly planning process. We used OKRs and sort of tied everything that we were doing back to some objectives that we had set for the year. And the thing that happened, I think in the spring of 2020 is that a lot of those certainties sort of went away to a certain extent. We weren't as sure where the market was going to go. We weren't as sure how, different parts of the world, different for us in the States, we're a North American company, but state by state, the rules were a little bit different. So we had to really narrow our focus down to what are the things that are going to help restaurants be successful in this new paradigm, and how can we plan in much shorter increments so that we can really be responsive to changes as they happen. So we went from more of a theme-based quarterly planning cycle to a 6-week planning cycle, and that's sort of like the most sort of tactically relevant part of it. Is we just narrowed our focus down to what are the things that we want to accomplish in the next 6 weeks that we think are going to be the most impactful for our users. And so that was a big change. We also kind of reshuffled the way some of our teams were organized and really rallied around cross-functional missions, which brought parts of the organization together that didn't frequently, have as many. They definitely had interactions and dependencies, but this was just a much tighter level of collaboration because we needed to move much quicker.
Curious, did anything go wrong? Like, what are your learnings there of, if you had your time again? Let's hear some of the war stories potentially, or things that we can learn from.
I think the things, it was an outcome of being really successful at some of the things we were trying to do. We moved very quickly. And I saw this, when I returned from leave, the team had done our teams had done a fantastic job of executing around these missions. But one of the things that you sort of realize is that the faster you're moving on the product side, the more you need to invest in some of those other parts of the business, things like sales enablement, things like support enablement, some of the communication channels that we had previously used with good success in sort of a quarterly planning cycle were a little bit strained in a 6-week planning cycle. And so we really had to go back and re-examine how we were communicating organizationally to make sure everyone was sort of on the same page as far as, what's coming up, what are we investing in, what's our priorities. And there was a lot of different ways that we approached this. And during, that initial timeframe, it was just an incredible atmosphere of transparency, where it was really all hands on deck. Everyone was talking about what they needed to do next. And as sort of things evolved, it was more about reestablishing process and reestablishing kind of a cadence to keep all those different stakeholders in the loop.
Heather, jumping to you. So you spoke at the beginning around your changes comes about as a result of growing and mergers and acquisitions, etc. So tell us a little bit about that. What has that meant for you personally as a leader? I'm assuming you've seen sort of the early days through that growth. So sort of you've evolved with that. What, as a leader, what's that meant for you personally, and how you've gone about your day and embracing change and rallying the troops around that?
Yeah. I mean, it's meant for us that we're bringing a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different ways of working, a lot of different capabilities together that were not previously together. And if we get it right, we could potentially have amazing competitive advantage. If we get it wrong, it's catastrophic and you lose everything, right? No pressure. But, I see my role in these kinds of changes as bringing people along from the journey, no matter which side of a merger they're coming from, and giving all of those different stakeholders and participants sort of agency in that change. I don't want to inflict change upon people. I want people to feel like they were core to that change process, that they have a stake in building a future together. So I see that it is a need for me to do my due diligence as a leader to make that change as seamless and painless as possible. So once we have a plan, I'm a wheel greaser and change facilitator to make sure everybody who needs to know has as much warning as possible, as much clarity as possible, and is aware of their role and their ownership in that change, because their needs and wants and concerns and perspectives, experiences are all incredibly valuable to defining what that future should look like.
Excellent. Yeah, mergers are amazing, aren't they? Because they're sort of this onboarding experience, but very condensed for a larger cohort of people, as opposed to sort of your monthly onboarding of new teammates. So it's always an amazing kind of very contained example of how to do onboarding. Just curious, for you personally, have you had to change your style throughout the years, or what's that meant for you? And also, I guess, the leaders around you, going from a smaller, more consulting agency base and that this now larger global footprint. What's the ask of our leaders when we think about that scaling need?
Yeah, I've definitely evolved and learned a lot in this last several years. I would consider myself very much a work in progress, but I have found that the things that I struggled with in the past were things like clinging to some non-existent sense of permanence and trying to sort of control things and make them all fit one mold and work one way. It's sort of rigid inflexibility, or trying to do it all myself and make all these decisions instead of bringing people along from the journey. And let me tell you, it only works for so long, especially as you're getting bigger and adding complexity and different perspectives. So the traits that I have worked hardest to nurture in myself for the early stages of change management, it's things like empathy, patience, and understanding. Human stuff, like not even process stuff. I need to understand what people need from this. And then in the later stages of change management, it's a very different mindset. It's more decisiveness and agility and follow through. And I find the latter part to be much easier once we know what we're doing. It's arriving at the right decisions that are best for everyone. That is the hardest part. And it's a distinctly squishy human endeavor.
All right, Heather, just jumping back to some of your comments that you made earlier around the growth and the scaling of the team over the number of years. Curious about, change takes energy. It's very, it's taxing, right, on people just personally, and also just on sort of how we go about our business as a team. Talk to me about how sort of the things that you've had to be very conscious of when we think about potentially fatigue, or how we've overcome that throughout the time that you've been sort of evolving and changing.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, humans are kind of creatures of comfort. We live in our comfort zones. We like things to be steady, predictable, and the same, even if we think we don't. So yeah, change fatigue is a super real thing. By the last merger, I had someone on my team saying, I cannot change my email address one more time. Something so small was gonna put them over the edge. So, we've definitely had to create a culture of change. I think that's important, but everyone has their limits. Too much change, too fast, all at once is completely overwhelming. And we have to remember that change is often an extra above and beyond what people are already responsible for day to day. And change is hard. So it's easy for people's batteries to get drained. And that motivational locker speech only goes so far to keep people motivated and aligned to that change. So I typically recommend for my leaders to pace yourself, make iterative changes in the moment whenever possible, rather than always big sweeping changes. Divide and conquer to avoid excessive stress and burnout as best you can. But anything you can do to pace out that change so it doesn't all hit at once can be a big help. We don't always have that luxury, so you need other tools in your toolkit too. But it's one very important way to combat change fatigue.
I'd love to dig a little bit deeper around the customer piece. What did that look like in the day-to-day of how did you stay close to your customers in that context, both understanding their needs, but also getting that, I guess, the feedback and communicating the change? What did that look like?
Yeah, we actually have a great area of focus within the Toast organization, specifically around sort of the voice of customer feedback loops. And so they're always looking for ways to engage with our customer base in different ways. We have a number of sort of more informal forums, even things like Facebook groups and customer discussion groups and sort of advisory panels that we've explored, as well as, we do have a pretty tight relationship between the customers and our support teams. So we get a lot of intel from those relationships. Our support partners internally are the ones who really have that, frontline engagement with the customers and can really keep us up to date. So we work very hard to maintain open lines of communication, as well as forming, cross-functional working groups to sort of tackle a particular problem area and understand, one of the things, we focus on a lot is configuring, the product menu experience. So we'll form, a small group of cross-functional stakeholders, people who work in support, people who work in sales, people who work in services, people who work in marketing, to really kind of pull all of those different strands of data together to get that full VOC perspective.
By the sheer nature of change, there's a huge role to play in communication and absolutely decision making. And when change goes wrong, potentially it's those two things that have hindered the ability to roll out change. I'm curious, Heather, what does that look like in your world? What tactics or approaches have you put in place to enable the comms and the decision making of change?
I think the biggest thing is going to be communication, just bringing people in early and often to be a part of that. From a more tactical standpoint, a big part of what we do is document in a living space. There's so much historical institutional knowledge that we need to retain, but then we also need to move people forward into the new ways of working. But I cannot emphasize enough the need to document that process. If you want to facilitate change smoothly with less anxiety for all, having a central source of truth to reference will take you very far. At the risk of wearing the band t-shirt to the concert, we do use Confluence for that, to document all of that process in a living place as our central source of truth. And similarly, we also use Trello as our project management tool for any major, well, we use it day to day on everything, but then anytime we have a major change initiative like the mergers or bringing teams together, we can also spin up specific spaces where we have total visibility and collaboration in all of those many, many moving pieces. It helps to make each of us individually accountable to the group, to do our part and move the ball forward. And it creates that crucial transparency that makes change management more streamlined and far less anxiety inducing.
What tactics have you put in place to really amplify the points that are relevant for individuals as opposed to having too much comms?
I actually would love to build on something you just said that really spoke to me. It was like, this transcends the org chart, basically. I love that because I think for many, many types of change, this is cross-functional work. Like rarely does major change fall just within one silo or department. So I love that you mentioned that, because you have to spin up these cross-functional teams of passionate individuals who can research and recommend the best solutions for a problem or the best future way of working. So for example, when our 3 teams came together, it meant a lot of day-to-day process changes in how we executed search and content projects for our clients. So who better to define what the future looks like than the people who are actually going to be doing the work, those stakeholders who are going to be executing on that day-to-day. It doesn't matter where you sit in the org chart. If you're impacted by that change, you want a voice in it, you want to say, and it doesn't matter who owns it once it's rolled out, you still want a voice and you want to say.
Yeah, it's amazing that having people feel like they're part of the change, that it's not being done to them, they're part of it as opposed to inflicted on them. This is always the gnarly question that I love hearing from teammates when we're talking about change, and so I'd love to hear your perspectives. Jessica, how do you measure success of change?
Oh, that can be a tough question because there can be so many different perspectives on what a successful change looks like, and they may not really agree with each other always. So it really depends on where you're coming from. I think adoption is really a measure of a successful change. I mean, there's different levels that you could probably look at change through. But I really think that if you're offering up something new and it's not being used, adoption is the biggest metric. So it could be something, if it's a process change or a new documentation portal or some component that even you want your internal stakeholders to take advantage of. If they're not leveraging it, if they're going back to sort of the old system and they're not sort of getting value out of it, that's how I would measure a successful change, is if you're actually able to tangibly see your users getting that value and coming back and having that, repetitive usage and saying like, yes, this made something better for me and I'm going to keep using it.
Heather, what does success look like for you, especially in the context of mergers and that growth, that hyper growth? What's that look like for you? How do you measure success?
A lot squishier in a lot of ways. Ultimately, the main thing that matters to me at the end of the day is, are my clients well cared for? And when you go through major mergers like this, there's certainly the perception of a risk of things getting dropped or lost in translation as you're bringing things together. So that's a very real fear that our clients may experience when we go through that change. So at the end of a change or down the road post change, I want to know that my clients have been well cared for, that they're satisfied, that they're still getting results. But then my second measure of success is almost always employee and workforce health, efficiency, effectiveness, morale. Are we operating like the high functioning team we are, or did something break in the process of change?
All right, thanks, team. This has been an amazing conversation. Really enjoying hearing your perspectives. Just to close us out, one thing I'd love us to do is think about what are the 3 key ingredients when we think about change. What are the things that our listeners can take away as they're about to embark on or continue their change journey? So Heather, what 3 ingredients come to mind for you?
Oh, it's tough to boil it down to just 3, but I will do this for you, Sarah. So top tips. Number 1, don't try to boil the ocean if you can avoid it. Aim for more incremental changes wherever possible and implement that change jointly and steady. So that will help combat that problem of change fatigue. A huge one is that we learned no process is precious. So when you're trying to evolve and bring different teams or processes together and generally stay competitive, things have to change periodically. And so we have to be tireless about finding friction and eliminating it, and merciless about cutting what no longer serves us. So whether that's organically as those things arise, or if it's regular reviews of the processes you have to toss what isn't serving you anymore, that change needs to be kind of an expectation. And then finally, market your successes throughout your organization or with your clients as you're navigating that change. No matter how small, make sure you're shouting those successes from the rooftop. Make sure that people are hearing the positive outcomes or learnings from change management. I find that it really helps to maintain buy-in and interest from key stakeholders who are either part of or affected by the change. And I find that it also builds endurance and momentum for the people doing the change, for the changes to come. But more than anything, empathy, patience, understanding at the early stages, decisiveness, agility, and follow through in the late stages. If you have that, you've got the right ingredients.
Love it. No process is precious. That's amazing. Great saying. Over to you, Jessica. What's it look like for you?
Yeah, I think Heather covered some really fantastic ones. The ones I would probably add, is make sure you understand upfront the impact that you're trying to drive with the change, and then just continuously check in with yourself and with the teams and sort of your stakeholders. Are we still on the right path towards making the change that we want to make? And is that change still the right decision for us and for our customers, for our guests? I would emphasize the sort of shouting it from the mountaintops and measuring your successes and talking about those. I totally agree with that. I also think clear communication up front, just getting everyone, together, even if it's a virtual, together in today's day is really important to make sure everyone sort of knows what are the guideposts, what are the things that the teams are driving towards, and then keeping those lines of communication open. Those are the biggest ones. And I would say being humble to change and understanding that you can't see everything coming down the pipe. You're not going to catch everything up front, and just staying flexible and sort of responsive to learning along the journey.
Perfect. And I'll just build on that from my perspective. Certainly echo everything that the both of you have said. Key ingredient for me is upfront the why. Having people understand the why of the change, and hopefully, ideally, they've helped to co-create that why. Right. So how do we get them on the journey as soon as possible? So again, it's not being done to them; they're actually part of the change. In my experience, also, I mean, you've both alluded to it throughout the chat. Is change is hard, and you're not going to satisfy everyone. The world's going to change as a result of change, hence the word change. So having a real strong view early as to what are the trade-offs we're willing to make, right? So, and having that view be known and understood by people, and then attaching it to the why. And to echo something that the two of you said, is absolutely make that change visible. I think that makes a huge difference on people seeing it, experiencing it, feeling it, and actually talking about it, because the worst thing it can be is that it's skunk works or it's invisible if we want change to be sustainable and long lasting within the team. So yeah, that's my wrap. Thank you both so much for your time. Great to hear your stories, and I'm sure our viewers have learnt plenty today as they embark their change journey. So thank you so much.